Today we're checking out something really cool, something that a lot of you have been asking about, and that is the new module version of the Argon 8. And we're gonna unbox it and we're gonna test it out, as well as talk about, of course, the differences between this and the keyboard version, play a few sounds, you know the drill by now, and also take a look at the new firmware for the Argon 8, because they have made some pretty substantial improvements to the platform. So let's get into it. Like literally. So you get a quick start guide. We have some screws, USB, power, and I think, yes, I wasn't sure. So it's actually rack mountable. That's actually pretty cool. Nice. So I assume the rack gears goes on something like this. So on the back here we have headphones, left and right outputs, we have expression, sustain, we have audio input on a mini jack, we have sync out, sync in, MIDI in and out, USB, and the power. So the module is actually really small. It's a lot smaller, for example, than the Hydra synth module. And just to put something to scale, here's the DB01 from Erica Synths. And this is a small device as well. Volca keys. So and today's video is brought to you by distrokid.com. It's the service that I use to get my tracks onto Spotify, iTunes, and a bunch of other stores. So if you want a good service, a reliable service to get your music out there, get it heard, check my link in the description. Just imagine that with some drums. Quite lovely. So if you're coming here and you're new to the Argon 8, basically it's an 8-voice digital synth. It's based on wavetables. That's why it has this kind of shiny, sparkly tone to it. And you could contrast this against something like an analog synthesizer, which usually has a little bit more of a fuzzy and warmer tone. So here's a few more demos. Now, before we check out how to create sounds on the Argon 8 module, you know, the features and everything, I just want to mention what's new in the new firmware, in the 2.0 firmware. So the first thing is that we have new envelopes. So there's a couple of them. So for the filter, the amp, and the mod EG, the assignable envelope, you can go into the menu and you can select exponential, snappy. Basically, it's snappy or better for percussive sounds. We have soft. It definitely smoothens out the curve a bit. Linear, we also have long versions, so exponential long, snappy long, soft long, and linear long. So what good is this? Well, for example, the longer versions are really nice for more evolving pad stuff. I'm gonna see if I can give you a little example here of a sound. So more envelopes means more sound shaping possibilities. Now I would have loved it if you could actually see the difference in the envelopes, but as far as I can tell, if I change an envelope, I don't think that the graphics update to represent this change, and from what I can tell it doesn't in the app either. But it's still very nice to have, and it opens up more possibilities for creating sound. Now there's also new modes for the delay. It can be set to clean, it can be set to colored or long. So basically if you want a clean delay, a colored delay, you know, adding a little bit more coloration to the sound, or if you simply want a longer delay tail. So here's a little sound with the colored delay, just, yeah, it sounds kind of vibey, I think. Now they have also improved on the gain staging, because patches could vary a lot in level. It wasn't something that I thought a lot about when I reviewed it, but it was something that I've seen other people mention. You go under audio and then we have patch gain. So here you can add gain, you can amplify the sound. And you can also change the gain boost, so we can have off, normal, or saturated. Another big thing for some of you is that they've added MPE support. So if you are a keyboard user, for example, you can now take more advantage of it, creating more expressive sounds. There's also a new chord invert function, and they have improved the unit with some bug fixes. But for some of you, the biggest improvement to the Argon 8 platform is the inclusion of a step sequencer. So if you're new to the Argon 8, basically we had a real-time sequencer that you can record into, and that works both on the module and on the keyboard version. But now they've also added a polyphonic step sequencer. So basically what this is just a different way of creating a sequence. Now, to record into the sequencer, there are basically two different modes. There's a record mode and edit mode. Hit Shift, hit the record button. Now we're in input mode, and you can see input mode, step 1. These 8 slots here are actually for the 8 notes of polyphony. So if I play a chord, yeah, so you can see here. So when I play a chord here, you can see that we're getting the notes. If I let go, we move on to step 2. Now we can, of course, go in here and we can change, for example, the length of the step, so we can make it slower if we want to. Now let's say you want to edit this and add some automation, and you can add 4 lanes of automation, so you can make changes per step. So in order to access the edit mode, we hit patch here, patch sequence, and record. So now you see that the view is slightly different. Steps 1 out of 4, and you can see that we're moving a little cursor. This lets you select a note, for example, and we can change the note if we want to. We can also preview. That previews the step and the automations on that step. But where are the automations? Well, funny you should ask. Hit page. You see here? Now we're scrolling, and here you can see 4 lanes of automation. So the first one here, we're setting to filter cutoff, and we can move to this empty one here and set it to the mix. So we're still on step number 1. Now let's go to step number 2 and the animators. So here we are in step number 2. Change the values a bit. So with this, you can create very distinct sounds per step, and it's a new and welcome addition to the Argon 8 platform. Now, what are the major differences between this module and the keyboard version? Let me Let me answer that for you. Now, far be it for me to be silly, but of course the obvious difference is that you don't get the Fatar keybed. As you can see here also, it's much smaller. You're also losing out on a few dedicated controls. So you have shared controls for the two LFOs. Here you have separate controls. You're also losing out on this section over here, which is the control for the sequencer. So for example, you have a few sequencer controls here. For example, sequencer hold, which is kind of a performance control. So you don't have that as easily accessible on the module version. Now for the envelopes, you have these buttons here to select what envelope you're affecting, and on the module you're pressing down here on the corresponding button here or knob here. Now I actually found that very intuitive, because it's like, okay, I want to change the amp-EG, I just press it. I want to assign the amp-EG, I just select it. I don't have to go to like a separate row of buttons. So for me personally, it actually felt more intuitive and faster. Not sure why, but I guess it's because, you know, here you have to jump between, and here you have to just press it. And it's the same for the effects. We have individual buttons to select the three effects, and then you have controls for them, whereas on the module you press it to select each one. And yeah, this actually works very well. I think it's a smart design. Of course, you can't have as many buttons and knobs on this small, very tiny module, but you can see the difference is pretty substantial. So yeah, they have to cut something out, and I think they've chosen actually the right things. It doesn't annoy me. I thought first that maybe it would, but no, not really. So overall, I don't think that you're losing out on a ton of control if you're picking up the module over the keyboard version. I think it comes down to if you need the keyboard or not. Next up, let's get hands-on with the Argon 8 module and see what it's like to make a sound on it and what it offers in terms of sound design capabilities. Now, if you do want an even slower and even more in-depth version of this video, you should check out my Argon 8 keyboard review, because these synths are of course identical in terms of sound shaping possibilities. So with that being said, let's dive into it. So it's an 8-voice digital synth based on wavetables. So wavetables are like these complex waveforms that you can scan through in order to find different interesting sweet spots or modulate them to create like these moving kind of sounds. So you start by selecting a wavetable, and we can sweep through it. We can also hit Shift and we can change the bank of wavetables. But to hear this better, I'm gonna set up an LFO here. I'm gonna press LFO number 1, press it again so it blinks, selecting wave 1 here to modulate sweeping through the wavetable. Now this is of course just one building block. What we can do next is we can apply a wave mod. So this is a static change to the wavetable. We're in OSC menu here and we can select here wave mod and it's off. So this applies a static change and there's multiple wave mods to choose from. So wave mods is one of the building blocks that we apply to the wavetable. Now the second way that we can change up the sound is by using oscillator modifiers. So oscillator modifiers are like cross modulations and there's multiple different versions that do slightly different things. I won't go into detail exactly what each and every one does. This is not a tutorial. Now to hear the effect, I think it's best if we bring in the second oscillator set here. So now we're listening to wave 1. And I've removed the LFO here. And now it's wave 2. And we can mix between them. Let's bring in the oscillator modifier. So these are the three main ways that we change up the sound. We have the wavetables that we scan through. We have the oscillator modifier that we can increase and decrease, and we can of course modulate it as well. And we also have the wave mods that apply directly, that are the static changes to each of the oscillators. So we can have two different ones at one time. Now let's talk modulation sources. So there's multiple ways we can modulate things. We have 2 LFOs that are assignable, and we have 3 envelopes. So we have a mod envelope that is assignable to anything, basically any parameter, and we also have the filter envelope, and we also have the amp envelope. Those two are of course not assignable, they're set to the filter and the amp respectively. There's also the joystick, which is assignable, so you can use that to modulate something. You can also use the aftertouch if you have a keyboard. So if you want to, you can use the keyboard for modulating something using aftertouch, for example. Now let's make a drawn out sound using the amp envelope, and we'll go to the filter envelope here, just press it to select it, and we'll change it up a bit as well. Still kind of boring. Let's use the mod EG here. Hold it down or press it once to assign it to something. Let's assign it to wave 1 here and wave 2. So you can start to hear a bit of movement, but we're not done yet. Let's assign the LFO here to the cutoff, the filter cutoff, and let's assign the second LFO to the resonance. You can hear how the LFOs are affecting the filter a bit, so we can also modulate the oscillator modifier. So let's see here. And let's use the mod EG as well to the oscillator modifier. And we can try a different filter. There's different filter types and they're accessible from the menu here. So I'm just going to go to filter, going to change it from standard to something with a notch, I think. Now another cool function is that we can use spread to either spread out the oscillators, giving us a kind of a bigger, wider sound. But we can also arrange the oscillators into chords, say a major third, or have them as a fifth. But we're going to keep it simple with a bit of spread. There's also different modes here. You can do a mono patch, a poly patch, you can do unison, you can also stack the voices. So that's interesting, but let's keep with the patch that we're building here. So in terms of effects, we have distortion. We also have 3 effect slots. That can be chorus, phaser, I think there's a flanger maybe, reverb, delays, and I talked a little bit earlier about the different colorations of the delay as well. So let's assign a new little, new effect here. Let's start with a reverb maybe. Hitting shift lets you go into the second row of parameters. Now let's add a second effect. We have chorus, phaser. There's different flangers, tremolo, lo-fi effects, rotary, stereo delay, and ping pong delay, and the X-over delay. Let's do the stereo delay and a third effect. So that's how simple it is to create a sound, and it's actually very easy to change up a sound once you created it, because you can just select different wavetables. And since we've set up all the modulations already, you'll hear instantly how it changes up the sound. We could of course just go into the menu here as well and select a different oscillator modifier, for example. Some interesting stuff going on there. And we could quickly change it to something plucky. So it's pretty quick to change up sounds on the fly because you have easy access to the wavetables. And of course, you know, it's like I said in my previous review, this is the kind of synths where all of these small things that you add, the wave mods, the oscillator modifiers, they add up. It's not something that jumps out of you and is like, wow, this is like the biggest sounding synth ever. But the small changes you make does add up and does create interesting, vibrant sounds. Like this, for example. There's also an arpeggiator. With various settings for time divisions, direction of the arpeggio, and of course octave range. Now, I have actually used Argon 8 on one of my latest releases, Renewal, which brings me to today's sponsored segment. I released my track Renewal, where I'm using the Argon 8 to add some shiny, sparkly digital shine to a piano part. Basically, I used Argon 8 to overdub that part. And I released the track using DistroKid, which is a subscription service that you use to get your music onto Spotify, iTunes, and a bunch of other stores. It's good because it's affordable. It's also quite fast to get your tracks out there. So if you're looking for a reliable service, check out DistroKid using my link in the description. Now we finally come to the last part of this video, my opinions. Now I'm gonna be very honest in this section here. I'm not paid to say anything in particular. Nobody has asked me to say good things or bad things. And sometimes it's hard when you're a reviewer and you go a little bit against the grain, against the public opinion. So just to give you context here, the Argon 8 came out around when there was a lot of hype for other synths, like the Wavestate from Korg and the Hydra synth. Now I have used the Hydra synth a lot, I've used the Wavestate as well, I've reviewed both here on the channel. Both are excellent synths. Now, if I were to pick, I would definitely go with the Argon 8 over the Wavestate. Now, before you start commenting angry stuff, how is it possible? The reason is simply that for me, purely subjectively, I prefer the tone of the Argon 8, and while I have used the Wavestate a lot, I just haven't found a good place for it in my setup, but I still think that Wavestate might be a more appealing synth to a wider audience. The Argon 8 is a little bit more of a specialist. You know, it does fewer things, but it does it really well. It's an interesting sounding digital synth. Now, Hydra synth versus Argon. Personally, I do prefer the Hydra synth over the Argon 8, but it's also a lot more expensive. There's also some unique aspects to the Argon 8, especially the keyboard version, which has excellent keys. It's a Fatar keypad. It's really, really good. You should try it. And the module version is extremely small, and that may play a big part into your decision making. I can definitely see this being very popular because of its size. But ultimately, when I'm comparing between the Wavestate, Argon 8 and Hydra, they're quite different synths to each other. They share some similarities, but they're also three great picks, so you can't really go wrong. It's more about listening. Do you like the tones that you're hearing? And if not, you know, make a different pick. So what about the module? Well, I actually think that they've made a really good job on slimming down the Argon 8 into a module format. They removed the right amount of knobs and buttons in order to make it slim, but without losing that much functionality. So overall, I actually think it's really well made, and it's actually very intuitive to use, for me at least. Especially with the new 2.0 update, that does bring some really nice improvements to the platform. So I think they're heading in the right direction for sure with their lineup. I still don't use the app, however. It's just for subjective reasons. The app works as intended, works well, but I'm just not interested in using an app. But you don't need to use the app. You can do everything from the unit itself. Sure, you have to dive into one or two menus, and this is where the app can be very handy. You can have it on a computer or a smartphone or a tablet, but I personally don't use it. Modal already knows this, but yeah, I still want more than 8 mod slots because they do run out fast. Could be, of course, that there's some kind of CPU limitation to this, but you know, I can always wish, we can wish for it, and we'll see what happens in future updates. And lastly, while I stand by my opinion that the knobs, the actual caps, not the encoders, could be better, could be nicer to the grip, I must admit, yeah, I brought this up in many of my videos about modal gear, I must admit that it's starting to feel quite nitpicky to talk about it, because it's one of those things that you notice when you touch the knobs for the first time, but after a few weeks, month of use, you don't really care that much. Sure, it's not that super satisfactory feeling of turning, say, a knob on my Matriarch, but it's also not a 2,000 euro synth. So basically the knobs hold up fine. I've used the Argon 8 for a couple of months now, and you know, no issues, and I don't really care that much anymore because you get used to the feel of the caps. But yeah, I'd love something with more grip. So I'm standing by that opinion, but I feel a little nitpicky. So this was my review of the module. Let me know if this is something that's interesting to you. Let me know what you think about the sound of it, if it's something that you will consider picking up or not, and if there are other alternatives that you are interested in. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to today's sponsor, DistroKid. Go and check them out. I have a link in the description. Hope to see you in a future video. Thank you so much.